This was a pretty awesome interview I've had with Jamon. He's a really awesome dude. If you don't know who he is, well, he is one of the co-founders of infinite.red, which is this pretty big, like pretty huge, not huge in how many employees they have, but like very much known in the industry. Consulting shop for React Native. You can look at their website, infinite.red. They are a huge like open source contributor. They have their own podcast. They do a lot of stuff, like a lot of amazing stuff. And their team is also pretty cool. Let me see if I can find like the whole team because you might know these guys. I'm telling you. This is Jamon. You got Gandla Board and also the CEO, of course, Todd. These guys are pretty cool. And I've been very lucky to get Jamin to interview with me today. We've talked about a bunch of interesting stuff from how he actually even got started in consulting and software, how he eventually made it into Infinite Red, and how Infinite Red kind of was born, so to say. And also we talked about like what's important if you also want to start a consulting shop of your own. Hint, sales and marketing. We talked about how you can do that, how you can help that along, and kind of what are important aspects of that. I think this is an episode that really hits home for me because I'm trying to build a consulting shop of my own right now, focused towards Web3, Solidity, Go, that type of stuff. And so a lot of like, maybe not a lot, but some of what Jamin is saying, I kind of already knew, and some is kind of shining a light on me. Either way, I think it's a very, very powerful and very useful episode to watch and to listen to if you're kind of in the same position where you're trying to build a small consulting shop of your own. There is one question which I want to ask you, which is how to spell your name, because I'll obviously do the intro and I don't know how to spell it.
Yeah. So Jamon, and you pronounce it Jamon,
Jamin, not Hamon, like
not
the
Hamon. Yeah. Yeah.
some of that.
Yeah. It's common. No, it's just, it's a name actually from the Bible. There were actually Jamonites, and Jamon was the leader of the Jamonites, except for in at least the King James version, it was spelled Jamin and not On. But I think my mom, from what I understand, my mom thought maybe Jamon would not be mispronounced as often because it looked a lot more like Jason. But
Well,
yeah, that's not how that worked
turns
out.
out it didn't work out at all.
Yeah.
No, that's funny. It's like when your family or even you, because I've seen you as a very much so a family man, which I love about you. I think it more people should be family men or family women.
Sure.
Uh, but are you guys like very Christian or very religious?
Yeah, we go to church. We go to a Lutheran church. I grew up in the same denomination, and my dad was a pastor from when I was like 6 months old until I don't know about 3 years ago or so, and then he finally retired. But he was a full time pastor for about 21 years. Before that, he was just a part time pastor of a very tiny, like 50-person church, and I kind of loved the little church feel. That was really nice. We went to a little bigger one when he became the pastor there at like 750 people or so. Not huge, but bigger. And then my wife and I a few years ago started going to another one in the same denomination in the similar area. Um, that is, I don't know, we're probably about 80 people now, something like that. So well, a lot smaller, and yeah. So yeah, I grew up in being Lutheran, and have continued to this day, and met my wife through the church, and so a lot of deep roots there.
Nice, nice. I wonder how does somebody who has a pastor as a father, and I'm not sure what your mother used to do, but how do you even go into coding from what I would expect a more traditional upbringing?
Yeah,
It's interesting to me.
yeah. No, that I mean that's a good question. So so there were 9 kids. I was the second oldest. I have a sister, me, two sisters, and then 5 brothers. And So uh, my dad, in addition to being a pastor, he owned a business. He owned an excavation company. So I grew up, you know, riding on backhoes and excavators and bulldozers and stuff as he'd do things. And then when I got old enough, you know, he put a hand shovel in my hands to, you know, like dig dirt in trenches and whatnot. And
Uh,
then got a little older and he let me actually run the machines. And so I did that. I probably have around, I've guesstimated somewhere around 1,000 hours on heavy machinery, something like that, operating excavators and bulldozers and compactors. And I never did like a grader, but I drove a dump truck around the job site. Wasn't allowed to do it. I wasn't old enough to do it on the road, but like all those things. And then he became a full-time pastor right around when I was 18, 19 years old. And so I continued doing construction after that. He sold his business. I worked for some other like home builders and whatnot. But the thing is, my dad, he won't admit it, but he's kind of a gadget guy. You know, he always like, you know, computers, whatever, you know, they're just a pain. But I always noticed he always like had a lot of the latest and greatest stuff. And he bought a computer way back in the day just to do the like accounting, the bookkeeping for his business, for his excavation company. I actually still have the computer right in the corner here next to me. It's a 286. Yeah, it's an old school computer from like 1991, 1990, somewhere in there. And then he upgraded to a 486 a couple years later because he needed it for QuickBooks, which was not supported on 286. And you know, in that time, I started messing around with batch files, and I started like, you know, I was like 11, 12 years old, something like that. And
okay.
then teacher gave me a basic book in sixth grade, and I started reading it and getting interested in the stuff and trying it on the school computers, and then eventually found QBasic on the 486, and then I just started like coding. So I'd always been kind of into coding. And then when I mean, I can talk about, there's a whole process that happened there that is kind of interesting. And I've told that on other podcasts, and happy to go through a lot of that.
Well,
But
if you talked about it, I would
yeah,
not go super in depth
yeah,
into
no
it.
worries.
I
Yeah,
think, yeah,
I it really like upshot was the housing crisis of 2008 forced me. I had a business at that point, doing like little websites and stuff, but it forced me to go fully into it. Like that's when I really like went into it. And so
did
yeah, just
uh,
kind of rolled on from there.
did like the demand for websites really increase back then in 2008?
It was more like the other thing I was doing, which was home design, decreased. And so all I had was websites. So I started like really kind of trying to push that. And companies, believe it or not, back then, you know, were still deciding to like move off of advertising in the yellow pages. So they were like, you know, we don't want to advertise in the yellow pages in the phone book. So let's put that money into a website, which wasn't much money, you know. But it was something keep me going, pay my bills a little bit, and I learned the trade: PHP, HTML, CSS, JavaScript.
Oh yeah, the good old PHP days. I
Mm-hmm.
actually started on PHP as well,
Yeah,
and I see a few like really strong parallels between me and you, which is kind of why I really wanted to interview you.
yeah.
You are a family man. I'm a family man. My wife is a stay-at-home wife, and I will soon have kids, and I want to have 4 kids. You are the same. Now I love you used to work in construction for your father, which I actually also did.
Is that right? Okay, yeah,
I started off with PHP.
that's great.
Um, this is super interesting. I I kind of want to ask you what were the rates back then in 2008? Like, how were the money looking for a normal or like decent website?
I in Well, especially in 2005 when I first started doing websites, 2004, 2005. You know, I was just doing them because it was fun, and some of the construction companies needed websites, but I was mostly doing home design. You know, that was like where I made my money. So I would do those for $800. You know, I'd like build a whole website for $800. And I would, I mean, the very first stuff I got paid for was like, I just charged like $14 an hour, and that was like, I was at that point, I was still a laborer, working in construction. So $14 an hour, that's what I got paid on the job, which I thought was pretty good for, 19 years old. And, so I charged that for coding because it's way easier than like packing boards, like I can write PHP for $14 an hour. That's way better.
Was exactly what happened with me. Like I was on this side, like
Yeah.
carrying concrete bags and doing all sorts of
Yep.
heavy stuff, and then I can get paid the same amount of money, which is still it was still kind of shit, but I can
Yeah.
get paid the same amount of money, but I sit in an office with AC.
Yeah.
Line me in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's yeah, exactly how my mindset as well. And it took me a long time to kind of like, really kind of think it through and be like, oh no, like this is a business. I need to start thinking about it like a business. And but yeah, I mean by 2008 I was probably building, projects in sort of the $2,500 to $5,000 range, something like that for a website. And a lot of fixed bid. There were some, I might do something for 55, 75 an hour or something like that. And so it was really cheap stuff. And the companies I worked for, that was more or less what they could afford. Um, so, by 20, I would say 2011, I moved into more Ruby on Rails and uh, started charging more and getting a little bigger clients and moving outside of construction for one thing. Um, and that was pretty helpful. And then discovered iOS development, and that was in 2011, 2012.
I know
And
you
so, yeah,
that basically just was like, wow, this is so much nicer and cooler than
I
just
loved it. Yeah, I loved it. It was just like being able to hold it in your hand, like the app that you're building, and touch, like touch was just so magical compared to using a mouse. I was just like, okay, this is where I want to be. So I started building more and more iOS apps, all the way through, I guess, 2015, when we ended up merging. I merged my company with another company to become Infinite.red, and then that's all we do.
so basically you pretty much freelance from day one. You
Hmm.
never actually had a job with a place.
No, no, I never did. It never occurred to me to go get a job because I didn't have a CS degree. I had one semester of um, of community college, um, and so it was like, who would hire someone who doesn't have a CS degree? Like, obviously, I just need to
Back
do stuff
then,
myself. Yeah,
especially back then, now they're much more open to like not having a CS degree. I
yeah,
have no degree and I get hired for jobs
oh yeah,
when I, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And I had a very similar starting where I just kind of started freelancing, building websites for random people as a freelancer. But
yep,
I eventually got a job because I guess my mentor told me, "Hey, a job in crypto would actually pay you more than freelancing," which is what happened.
yeah,
But yeah, I was freelancing too, and it's very interesting to me that I guess due to a different setting where in back when you were doing it, it was hard to get a job without college. That's why you ended up just you kept on doing it, and it
right.
eventually got to an agency, pretty much.
Yeah, basically, needed help. So I hired some junior developers and taught them how to code, including my brother. And just like I need some help. So like, let's bring some people in to to do some work. But it ended up being a lot of work still for me because they were juniors and I was mentoring them, and I wasn't the greatest at it either when I started. I was very much like, here, do this thing, and oh, you didn't do the thing, well, I'll do it for you. That's just not a good way to learn. And it took me a long time to kind of like get to the point where I was like, okay, I need to actually, be a leader and a real manager and mentor to these folks. Interestingly, some of the first hires I ever made still work for me. And so, yeah, many, many years later, um, I think I hired the first one 2008, 2009, something like that. And he still does work for us. So it's pretty
That's
cool.
the
Yeah.
basically 16 years,
Yeah,
15.
I know.
If
Yeah, and I taught him to code.
so, I mean,
um,
I think it's a good tell that you're probably a good boss or a good manager. Um, yeah,
I have made every mistake that just about you can do. But you know, you always try to like get better at it, learn, and you know, like I guess the I'm a big believer in feedback loops and constant iteration, and you know, people overestimate how much can change in like a week, but they underestimate what you can change in a year if you just continually kind of work at it.
I like part of why I wanted to interview is obviously because I kind of, as I said before, I saw a bit of myself in you when you were younger, and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to follow a somewhat similar path. I want to start my
Yeah.
own business at some point. I think now is a good time in my career because
Yeah.
I'm kind of pretty experienced, but also I don't already have kids to where like it's a delicate process. I can
Yeah.
still take some risks, and I think it's a good moment for me. And so a big issue for me was kind of the identity change of going from I'm a programmer to I'm a programmer, but also a business owner. And
Mm-hmm.
I freelanced before, so it's not entirely foreign, but it still feels
Yeah.
weird, especially since I've obviously run my numbers.
Yep.
The only way I can kind of make it make sense is if I hire one or two or maybe three, but at least one other person to work alongside me. And so you mentioned you hired people who not only weren't juniors, but also they didn't even know how to code. And
Yeah.
I can imagine how nerve wracking is the how did you manage this whole transition and like what sort of good advice would come in mind when you think of this whole transition?
I think if I were to go back, I certainly would do a lot of things differently. It was very stressful and I worked way too much, and it took a toll on my wife and my family through that time because my kids were born 2005 to 2013,
Okay.
uh, which is basically through the, you know, through the meat of that struggle. And so my wife was raising these kids while I was raising you know, this
Yeah,
business.
I can imagine.
Um, and in fact, it was so stressful that in late 2014, I told my wife if something doesn't change, and I'm an like kind of eternal optimist, like I'm very much like positive. Let you know it'll work out. Like let's keep rolling. Which is sort of what kept me going, I guess. But at that point, I was like, okay, and that's when Todd and I started talking about merging our companies. Was like January of 2015, and it happened in October. So we were able to kind of go through that process, and it was a really amazing thing for me, for the employees that came with me from my old company to the new one. They've been able to grow in a lot of ways, and I grew a ton. You know, Todd is in a lot of ways the mentor I never had. He was able to like give me a lot of. He's you know he's owned multiple businesses in the past and he's done very well. Um, and then I bring a lot to the table too. And now we have another business partner as well, Gant Laborde. So Gant, of course, brings his own magic to it, which is awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
really
but
into
yeah, like
I know he's like a big contributor to AI and JavaScript type of stuff. It's like his libraries are pretty cool.
he's super smart and he's like such a fun guy too. Like he's got both the smarts and the you know the fun kind of all together.
Nice. I still think your transition was like this is I think at least to me and possibly because I'm imagining most people that are curious about starting an agency or some sort of a freelancing business or consulting business, if they're watching this video, they're probably in the inception part of it or the early years of it. You're probably not going to watch this video if you've done it for 10 years, or if you are doing it, it's probably more for entertainment than for actual lessons, I'm imagining.
Mhm.
So the transition, like when you decided to merge and effectively partner up with Todd and eventually later with Gant, you're
Mhm.
obviously giving up a lot of control and a lot of power.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man. I think I could be described as somewhat of a control freak. I don't know if I could do it. I'd be scared to do it. And
Yeah.
like, how did you cope with that? And
Yeah.
yeah, Did you cope with that?
No, totally. Um, Absolutely. Like this was not a decision that I came to lightly. I think I happened to be in the right place for a lot of reasons. I was too stressed, so I knew something had to change. It was like what I was doing was not sustainable. So super important. Um, Secondly, uh, Todd and I had developed a relationship. We had been, we had met at a conference in 2014, and we had continued to chat over Slack, which was new at the time, by the way. um, we were chatting and kind of just sort of like commiserating on things that were hard about running a consultancy, and we really hit it off. And we chatted every day, a lot, a ton, and we ended up actually doing some work for them. Like he and his business partner Ken, who was also in the original founding group, um, but he left in 2019.
Okay.
We still stay in touch. I just chatted with him the other day. Still very friendly. But he like Todd really got it, and I could see that he had a lot of similar philosophies to me, and he could see the same in me. Um, and I really wanted to make sure that he would treat my team as well as I did, and turns out he treated them even better than I did, which was amazing. So we actually did this sort of like merging dating period where we did this thing where we actually ran our two companies as if they were one, um, and had a setup so that we could pay each other kind of you know in a way that made sense, so we could pay our bills properly. But we kind of like, if he got a project, then we would work with his team on it, and if I got a project, then they'd work with our team on it.
We
For
interchangeably worked as subcontractors to one another, kind
Yeah,
of coquetting with the idea of partnering up.
that's right. And running it as if it was one company in terms of like how we managed our project teams, which was a really smart move. I actually think it went super well. And then in July of 2015, um, got together. It was in Paris, actually. We were there for a conference, and we're like, "Are we going to do this?" And all right, let's do this. And so yeah, we didn't go into it like blindly, but you're right. Like it's a little nerve wracking, and there's dynamics there. When you're business partners, a lot of people say it's like being married to them, because you spend so much time together, and there's so many decisions that you might make or they might make that would affect each other, and you have to like discuss like how do you allocate scarce resources, and how do you spend your time, and you have to build trust and all of those things. So I was actually joking with my wife, not joking, but like kind of like, thinking over with my wife last night that like, I think that a lot of the skills that I've learned as a leader at Infinite Red have helped make me a better father, and vice versa.
I can imagine, because ultimately it's really about motivating people to do the things that you think are right for the team or the family, which is kind of like a team
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. And we really do try to treat our team as family, as friends. Now, obviously, some people hear that and rightly have a reaction to it, which is totally understandable. But I don't really care about the perception. I just try to actually do it, actually treat them the
I
right way.
think I think most people have a reaction to that because, in truth, most companies that do say that
They don't actually. Yeah. Yeah.
don't actually do that.
Yep.
I also think most people, when they hear that, they have this skewed perception of, or like when they first hear that, when you're still young and impressionable, you
Yeah.
actually expect it to be exactly like a family, and
Yeah.
you have to think. I think you have to be aware that like, even if it's the best situation ever,
Right.
it still won't be your family. Your family is your family, and
Yeah.
there's a cutoff point to it. But your workplace can still be close and can still be pretty cool. I think
Yes.
so.
Absolutely. And we have to like go through that balance, because obviously there are still pressures on a business that are different than a family. Um, But really, what it comes down to is just treating people well, treating people as you would want to be treated,
Yeah,
that sort of thing. That's the most important thing: caring about them as humans and not just employees or resources.
I think that's
Um,
very fair.
but
And
then there's the other part of business where if it fails, if the business model fails, if the revenue is not there, then you don't achieve your goals. You can't pay people what you need to. You can't hire what you need. You can't grow. You can't have the you know you can't have the stability and the security that people need to be able to kind of move forward with their lives. So you do still have to make business decisions. You still have to like look at it from a very like um like this is a machine in some ways too, and you're designing that machine. And that's the thing that I think I didn't really get until you know probably a few years, well, yeah, I mean some number of years ago, I kind of started to come around to this idea of like we need to be thinking about it more as a machine too. Like keep the humanity in it, but also be looking at like what are the systems, how are we set, what's the business model, like how do we, all those things. And I think a lot of that stuff has helped us kind of pivot toward um, where we are today.
it's definitely a balance. And my father also was a businessman in construction for many, many
Mm-hmm.
years, practically for all of his life, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I've grown with all these employees around me who were also our family friends
Mm-hmm.
because we kind of ran like a family business. And so I've seen what you're saying, where it actually can work very close to like a family. We've been like my father has been godfather to many of these
Mm-hmm.
people,
Yeah.
and it's really amazing when it works. But I think you also pointed out a very good thing, that you also have to look at the business side of things. My
Yeah.
father eventually went bankrupt,
Yeah.
and things were gnarly for a few years.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the reality. You have to be on top of it, and there are, there are many, many ways to fail, many ways to go down in flames, and so you have to be continu- continually identifying the parts of the business that are, performing suboptimally, and put invest time into it. And it's not always easy, and you don't always know the answer.
Fair. I think my philosophy, and I really want to hear your opinion on this, is that as you go, and this is something again I'm battling with in terms of like my identity change from
Hmm.
programmer to business owner. But I think
Right.
like the core aspects of making a business or a consulting shop work is, are you doing sales and marketing well? I think that's the that
Yeah.
seems to me to be the core first most important thing. What do you think about that?
Without without projects and clients coming in, and without being able to present a compelling sales pitch and solve their problem, then you don't really have a business. You have an idea, but with the actual projects coming in, then everything flows from that. Where you are like, okay, now we need a project team, and we need to be able to put that together. We need to be able to do operations, and we need finance, and we need um, you know leadership and mentorship and support, and all of these things flow from your ability to present like a compelling pitch into the world, and get people to either buy your product or come want to like engage your services. And so you're exactly right. That's exactly, you got to start there, in my opinion. Of course, maybe because I've been doing sales for so long, I handed it off to Gant this year, but before that, I did it for 18 years, something like that. And then now I'm really focused on marketing. Maybe it's a little bit top of mind for me, but that's the start of the funnel. Really, you got to be able to, come up with a good value proposition and brand, and then go get out in front of the right people.
Okay, so this is a big part of what I want to talk about. It's sales and marketing. I
Yeah.
also want you, if as much as you can, obviously it's hard maybe to look back when you were still a beginner, when you didn't
Hmm.
have the type of brand that Infinite Red has now, where it's obviously not easy, but definitely easier to get clients and work. Like, how do you see a good like funnel work from marketing to sales? Are you more of an inbound guy, an outbound guy? What's been working for you?
Yeah. I think that. any business needs to look at who who are the people that when they find you are going to get excited about it. Like, oh, this solves my problem. So you have to figure out like who you are and what you do, and then from there, like who's going to get excited about it and want to engage you, and who has the budget. Because like maybe you might have some app idea guy that has, you know, $1,000 to put into an app, and it's like, well, that's just not going to quite pay the bills. Sorry, might be a great idea, but not gonna work. So you have to identify those, and then you have to go figure out how do they make decisions. Like how do they go from like oh, I have an idea, or my boss asked me to do X, Y, or Z. Now I need to go out and get a solution for this. What are they doing? And traditionally there was way back in the day there was uh like I mentioned way back, like phone book, right? Like that was way back. But then there's things like SEO and whatnot, and you got to have a compelling website that these are the basics, like making sure that you have a good website that represents you, that isn't just gonna like turn them off, right?
Yeah.
um and it's surprising how often when I talk to business owners who struggle with this, how often they come up with all these like really special ideas, or like you know different ideas on how they might improve their marketing. But then you go look at their website and you're like, this doesn't even represent what you're doing very well, and you need to fix that. So doing all the basics is really, really important. And then yeah, finding how to get in front of them and being willing to invest that time. It could be things, traditionally what we did was open source, and we did conference talks and things like that. So we'd get in front of developers, and developers would recommend us to their bosses. And now we've continued to kind of evolve that and do more, you know, like actually have a marketing plan and strategy beyond that, and execute on it. So for us, our target customer is, or our target, I guess the person we're trying to reach is usually a developer of some sort who works at a company. They might be a CTO or something, but they're technical, and they could just be a normal web developer, um, and their boss says, "Hey, we need a mobile app, or we need to redo our mobile app. And what about React Native?" Or maybe they recommend React Native. Okay, cool. Let's do React Native. When can you start it? Well, I can't because I've got all this other stuff on my list. Plus, I've never actually built like a full React Native app. And then, okay, well, how do we do this? Well, you could go talk to Jamon, or you could go talk to infinite.red. That's what we want to happen, and it happens all the time. And it's also, I don't mind giving out this secret online, quote unquote, because the reality is it's hard to do. It's very hard to do. It's very hard. Developers are naturally
Oh yeah.
suspicious and like a little bit critical, and they're not going to just recommend somebody just off the cuff. They need to actually have some level of trust, and building that trust has been literally a decade of interacting and being in the community and contributing positively, both open source, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, wherever, at a conference, wherever I might meet someone, at a meetup, doing our podcast, all those things. Wherever we meet somebody, you want to make a positive impression, and like what you're doing, and have them recommend you. And that's really the heart of it. We have other things that we're doing too, but like the heart of it really comes back to that.
This is it. It sounds perfectly reasonable. It sounds like obviously it has worked very well for you guys. I don't know how much revenue you guys are pulling in, and I don't know if you're comfortable sharing. If you are, you can.
We are, uh, I probably can't share that. But it's not hard to do the math of, around 30 people, 20 some consultants, working full time in US rates. That kind of gives you a sense. And, uh, I was just doing some reporting yesterday, and just about every year has been year over year growth. Not necessarily always in team size, but just continuing to hone our skills and get better so that we can push our rates and get, clients that appreciate what we bring to the table and whatnot. Because a lot of times, they won't necessarily hire a team of 10 from us. It will often be like two developers, really high level, because we have no juniors. Like we're all like senior plus, really high level engineers. We have like a 15-year average professional experience across the technical team, and that's pretty amazing. So they'll hire a couple of our developers and then have, five of their developers or something work with us.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then we take care of all the hard problems. We teach them how to do it. When we leave, I mean, for example, the Mercari project, we started, I think there were 5 Android developers working with us, and we taught them, as much as we could and onboarded more and more. By the time we left, there were triple that working on the project. And we were down to, I think we started with 5, and so it was like 5 and 5, right? And it went down to 1. I think it was 2 for a long time and 15-ish, and then down to 1, and they
So
kept
you
their team size. So
to a
that
certain
was
degree, you also work in kind of a training capacity.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's a big part of what we do, and we hire for that. We hire for people who are teachers and who like to get their knowledge across, etc.
Makes sense. I want to ask you a question, which it may be hard to answer because it requires you to like really imagine a lot. But
Yeah.
say you didn't, say somehow automatically the brand of Infinite Red disappeared, and so what do you do next? Do you just keep on doing the same thing, trying to rebuild the brand, but being fully aware that it might take months or even years before you actually have inbound? Or do you do something else? Or like, how do you handle this type of situation?
Yeah. Just to clarify, so you're saying similar structure, otherwise we're not like building a product or something, still consultancy type thing. Yeah.
When still only seniors, we're assuming that you somehow convinced people to believe in the
Yeah.
vision and join
Right.
as
Yeah.
contractors. We're assuming this worked out well,
Yeah.
strictly the sales part.
Yeah. Well, obviously you can't just lean on like your brand and your reputation in the industry, and so you have to bring something new to the table. You have to bring something that kind of like has people step back and be like, oh, that solves my problem. So, for example, I have a friend who started consultancy recently. Who, his whole thing was serverless. Like that was like he just everything serverless. He's like really good at AWS and whatever, but he has no name in the industry like at all. And so what he did was just lean really hard into that. Like we're really good at serverless. If there's anything that you're running into, we've done it. We know how to do it. And then yeah, just getting the word out there. Yeah, I mean, I'm not afraid to reach out to my personal network and ask people to keep an eye out. Like another friend had started a consultancy, and he was wondering how to get his first projects and whatever. And I was like, dude, like you have like 2,000 mutuals on Twitter, and they're mostly like software developers, right? People that he follows that also follow him. Um, how about you reach out to 500 of them and, in DMs over the course of a couple weeks, and just say, hey, I'm starting this new thing. Would love to get it, kicked off the ground and whatnot. So having some network helps, personal network. If you don't have that, then you have to build that, and that takes time. So it can be a little tougher, but there are ways to do that, both in person and online.
Definitely ways to do that. My whole career, just to kind of give a bit of a, I guess, a window into that, I've known nobody in the industry. I'm
Hmm.
some guy from Romania who learned to code on YouTube and never worked for a Romanian company ever in my. And I just randomly found people on Twitter and convinced them to give me a chance somehow,
Yep.
and
So
it
you've
turned
done
out
this. Yeah,
well. Yeah, I just
absolutely.
have I just personally, I just have to learn to do it on a bigger scale, bigger enough scale to,
Yep.
um, first of all, to like keep myself in business, then to, because the problem with I know we're closing in on time, and I'm
Yeah,
gonna wrap.
yeah, no worries.
But the problem with consulting, especially if you hire people, is that now you're not getting 100% of the money. Now it's eating into your margins, and so
Sure.
you kind of have to raise the prices,
Yeah. Yep.
and that feels hard to me. It feels
Raising prices is tough. And there's a very simple solution. Um, you need to be okay not getting the project. Or if it's an existing client, you need to be okay having the client go away. And how are you able to be okay if that happens? You have to have other options.
a huge pipeline.
And how do you get other options? You need to invest, as you said in the beginning, in your marketing and sales side of it. Um, and of course, there's other factors. You need to be worth it. Like if you're not worth it, you're going to be constantly churning. So if you're charging way more than you're worth, that's a problem. If you are, but if I mean, like if 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 your customers, if your clients aren't complaining about your prices at least once in a while, then it's probably a little too low. So
Okay.
you need to start there.
Okay,
But
fair.
it's really hard as a business owner to have the confidence to raise prices if you don't have another project as a backup. That's just really, really hard. So it's especially if you're small, you get into this trap where you're like, I'm busy now, so I'm going to focus on shipping the projects, and you stop doing all those other things. You need to not stop. You need to have those things continue to go.
Okay, this is actually a friend of mine who is a consultant in crypto as well.
Mm-hmm.
Very good business. We are very much in crypto influenced by how if it's a bull market or a bear market,
Sure.
it can really make a business or it can crash a business.
Yeah.
And he had a very good year last year. Everything was awesome. Past 6 months, he was filled with work as well, except for the past 2 months, because exactly like you said, he
Mm-hmm.
stopped marketing and
Yep.
selling because he was so busy. And now 2 months he's dried up and he hasn't gotten any
Now you're
deal.
panicking. Yeah. And you
Yeah,
get into
except
this cycle, where it's like,
feast and famine.
um, feast and famine. And then when it's famine, you're taking on not great projects because, they're not as good of a fit because you're desperate and, at the lower rates or whatever. Then you're too busy. And so you're just like, constantly churning. And there's a lot of that happening with my business. It was just, there was a lot of that back in the day. Uh, Big part of the stress.
I have a few more questions for you so we
Sure.
can wrap up. I'm not really sure which of them to ask you. I guess
Hmm.
one question which I want to ask you is, if you, with everything that you know now, if you were to start over, do you think you would be happier, or do you think overall you'd be more satisfied if you still built an agency, or if you went the route of like a very high end solo, or not necessarily solo, but you and two or three other guys, but like super high end as possible?
That is a good question. I don't think I would do the very, very, very high end consulting. Um, if I did that, I would probably go for more working at a startup or something to provide that at a level where I'd have a lot of, I'd have equity and whatnot to leverage that high value stuff in more than just kind of like proving your consulting rate. Um, and in a lot of ways, like what I've been able to do is like apply my skills toward building the business, and it's a lot less my coding skills, of course. Which actually was tough for me to swallow that fact, because for many years from when I was 12, I was like a programmer. I was good at it, and I I had to come to terms with the fact that when I was programming, it was sort of taking away from my real value at the business, which was building the business. And so that was, I guess, the crux of it. I had to actually change my identity around that, and it was painful. Actually, it was not an easy transition for me.
I can imagine, and I've seen this with a lot of engineers, whether it's like the transition from programmer to business owner, whether
Hmm.
they're an indie hacking product, or like even people transitioning into engineering management.
Hmm.
It, it feels like the identity change can really hurt most back into being just a normal programmer.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think at this point, most likely, if I had to, which I don't want to, but if I had to change, it would have to be like a leadership position, really, where I can leverage the skills that I've developed. I'm still a decent programmer for sure, but I'm 42, going to be 43 soon, and I think that it's a fairly rare person that can stay super, engaged and really good into their 50s as a programmer. Now we have a few of those that are really amazing, and no knock on them. In fact, the opposite. I'm impressed, but I know that for the vast majority of people, there's sort of this transition toward, you got to find other ways to kind of add value, because you're not going to be so like excited about the latest tech, and like investing in you have to learn so much and so often. Everybody knows, like developers know this. It it can be something that you can continue to do into your 60s, for sure. But a lot of people sort of get to a certain point where they're like, well, I'm not as interested in the treadmill, right?
Fair, fair. I had a few more questions, but I want to wrap this up, not to take too much of your time.
Yeah, no
So I have
worries.
one last question, and that is, I guess, also a sort of a way for you to maybe shill Infinite Red. And I want to ask, what's next for you guys?
Yeah, I think for us, we have we have a vision in mind of what Infinite Red is going to be, and we're getting there. Like, it's pretty close, but we still have some things to solve. We still have some things to work on. I mentioned that I was working on the marketing side. Gant has actually been moving forward the sales side of things tremendously, and we have Todd working on our finance side of things, and also all three of us are training our next generation, the director level at Infinite Red, which Robin, Jed, and Justin are our three directors, and like they're amazing. And we just have to make sure that they have the support and the mentorship and the training to step into those roles and really take ownership. And the next phase for Infinite Red is really going to be driven by those three. They are going to be the ones who kind of like bring fresh ideas to the consultancy and push us forward. We're not looking to be huge, but we want to be a little bigger. We're currently 30, maybe 40, something like that. Um, because we purposely make sure we don't grow much at all. Like one or two a year is sort of like a reasonable pace, and we try to hang on to people. Like long term. We want people to stay there their whole career if we can keep them, and that's hard to do. So that allows us three owners to really kind of focus on any parts of the business that are running rough. If the directors are doing the day to day, so Jed doing all the operations, and Justin doing like the communications, marketing, events, and then uh, Robin leading like the tech teams. And we also have Derek helping with sales and whatnot. So we have a good team in place, and we need to grow a little bit. So we're doing that. Probably probably gonna we hired a couple. We're gonna probably pause for a little bit and let them kind of acclimate. We always have this absorption rate,
Okay.
but then from there, probably a little bit more again, and continue to. And then at a certain point, then it'll feel like we've checked that off, like we've accomplished what we want to do.
Would you guys ever consider selling Infinite Red?
Like my business partner Todd says, everybody's got a price. If someone came to me with a ridiculous offer, I'd have to consider it. But like when you think about it, there's I don't know if you've ever heard the story of the Mexican fisherman
Oh yeah,
and the businessman.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I know the story. Yeah,
And the for the I won't do the story, but for those listening, go look it up. It's a good story. But the idea, more or less, is that this Mexican fisherman, has a great life. Businessman comes and tries to convince him to scale it up and become this big empire. And then he's like, "Well, what do I do after I do that?" And he's like, "Well, go do these things." And the fisherman's like, "I already do those things. Like, I'm
yeah,
enjoying life, like I get to go fishing, I get to like hang out with my wife. I don't have to work super hard, all those things." Um, and so like that's a lot of how I'm looking at it, is like I'm enjoying life right now. No, I'm not waiting for some future like success. Like this is where like I wasn't enjoying life when it was super stressed. So I had to fix that. But now
yeah,
that it feels like things are rolling along and, I'm still working maybe a little too hard on certain aspects of the business, but I want it to be a sustainable pace. My kids are growing up. My youngest is 11. My oldest is already out of the house, already married, and he already has a kid on the way. So I'm going to be a grandpa in November.
congrats.
And thank you. And so life is moving along. And I want to be here for that. I don't want to be, stuck in the office the whole time.
I think that's I think that's perfect. Honestly, it resonates with a lot of my values, and I love what I'm
Mm-hmm.
hearing. And I think this was a great episode.
Yeah,
I
great questions too. Yeah,
thank you. I
appreciate it.
really want to thank you for your time, and I'm glad to have had you today here.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Alex. Appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun.
It was great. I just want to thank you all for watching this interview. I hope it was really interesting to you and helpful, because it was for me. And I think, if you're in a similar boat with me, it was probably also interesting and really useful and cool to you as well. I also want to kind of shill my own service, my own consulting shop, because realistically speaking, this is a good part. Like, I enjoy interviewing, but also there's something in it for me as well. I am building, recently started a small Web3 consulting shop. We primarily do Solidity work and Go work. That's what I am kind of very good at. And I have a few other devs which can work alongside me. If you're interested in that, please go on my website, leadsoftware.com, and check us out. It would mean a lot to me. Thank you.